think of ourselves as the most powerful beings in the universe, it's unsettling to discover that we're wrong. Time has come to see the world as it is.
Can we pull back the veil of static and reach into the source of all being? Behind this curtain lies this random pattern generator. You will be responsible for an escalation that will destroy everything.
In this episode, I'll talk about some other strange things that happened to me when I was growing up. I remember something a bit spooky that happened to a friend and I at a sleepover. There was a time when my family felt the need to build additions onto our house, so the bathroom that used to be my parents' was now a guest bathroom, and a small window high up on the wall in there that used to let in sunlight now looked into the empty upper frame of that new part of the house. It was weird. When friends would stay over, we would usually camp out in some other room of the house other than a bedroom. I don't remember exactly why. I think it was just because the bedroom was conventional and boring. One night, a friend and I were bunking in that guest bathroom, and we were talking about how creepy it was that the window looked into that empty part of the house. My friend said something along the lines of, "Wouldn't it be creepy if a rotting skeleton man banged on that window?" Right after he said that, there was a banging sound on the window. We didn't see a rotting skeleton man, but the banging sound frightened us enough that we grabbed our pillows and blankets and got the hell out of there. One may assume that it must have been someone playing a prank, but he was the only friend staying over, and my parents and brother were not the type to pull any kind of prank, let alone one that would involve them breaking into that normally inaccessible part of the house. It also sounded much too loud to be a sound of the house settling. One night, when I was a young teenager, I was home alone playing the Terminator game on the Sega CD system. I should mention that old video games used to have, as a subcategory of the main menu, a screen where you could play all the sound effects that appeared in the game. When I was on the main menu screen of the game, I heard, down the hall, a massive, extremely loud crashing sound. It sounded like an entire entertainment center had been overturned. Immediately after the crashing sound, I heard, coming from the game, a voice say, "It's just him and me." This freaked me out, so I grabbed a weapon from my brother's knife collection and ran to the other side of the house to watch TV in the kitchen with my dogs until my family got home. I couldn't find anything that fell over or anything else that could have made that horrible loud noise. The voice saying, "It's just him and me," was a sample from the movie Terminator, but I don't know how that sample played because I didn't activate it, and I wasn't even on the right menu screen to even have the option of playing the sample. Also, I had never heard a sample play on the menu screen before that, or even after. And now, the news.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
In the late 1970s, an English social worker named John Stroud made some rather interesting discoveries about identical twins. In 1979, he was approached by a 39-year-old woman from Dover, Barbara Herbert, who was searching for her twin sister. Their mother, a Finnish student in London, had abandoned them at the beginning of the Second World War, and they had been separately adopted. Barbara discovered her true identity when she applied for a copy of her birth certificate to join a pension scheme. She wrote to a Finnish newspaper and eventually learned that her mother had committed suicide in 1943. With John Stroud's help, she traced the midwife who had delivered her and even took the Registrar General to court in an attempt to learn who had adopted her sister. Eventually, she learned that her twin sister was called Daphne Goodship and that she lived in Wakefield, Yorkshire. Daphne agreed to come to King's Cross Station to meet her twin. When they finally met, both were wearing a beige dress and a brown velvet jacket. And this proved to be only the first of an astonishing series of coincidences. Both were local government workers, as were their husbands. Both had met their husbands at a dance at the age of 16 and married in their early 20s in the autumn. Elaborate weddings with choirs. Both had suffered miscarriages with their first baby, then had 2 boys followed by a girl. Both had fallen downstairs at the age of 15, and both had weak ankles as a consequence. Both had been girl guides. Both had taken lessons in ballroom dancing. Both had lived in Silchester. Both read a particular woman's magazine and had the same favorite authors. Altogether, John Stroud listed 30 coincidences. Some could be explained by the fact that they were identical twins, for instance, fear of heights, physical mannerisms, dislike of the sight of blood, food preferences. But accidents like falling downstairs or miscarriages could hardly be explained in terms of their genes. By a coincidence that seems typical in such matters, the subject of identical twins had become a subject of national attention in America at the same time when identical male twins appeared on the Johnny Carson chat show and told their incredible stories. When Jim Lewis of Lima, Ohio, was 9 years old, he learned that he had an identical twin who had been adopted at birth. 30 years later, at exactly the same age as Barbara Herbert, he decided to see if he could find him. Unlike British courts, American courts are inclined to be helpful in such cases, and Jim Lewis soon learned that his twin was called Jim Springer and lived in Dayton, Ohio. And as soon as they met, they discovered a string of the same kind of preposterous coincidences that had amazed Barbara and Daphne. Both had married a girl called Linda, then divorced and married a girl called Betty. Both had called their sons James Allen, although Jim Lewis spelled Allen with only one L. Both had owned dogs named Toy. Both had worked part-time as deputy sheriffs. Both had worked for the McDonald's hamburger chain. Both had been filling station attendants. Both spent their holidays at the same seaside resort in Florida and used the same beach, a mere 300 yards long. Both drove to their holidays in a Chevrolet. Both had a tree in the garden with a white bench around it. Both had basement workshops in which they built frames and furniture. Both had had vasectomies. Both drank the same beer and chain-smoked the same cigarettes. Both had put on 10 pounds at the same point in their teens and lost it again. Both enjoyed stock car racing and disliked baseball. Their case was written up in Science, the journal of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And a psychologist named Tim Bouchard, who had been studying twins at the University of Minnesota, was so interested that he raised a grant to study identical twins who had been separated at birth. John Stroud soon heard about his researches, and some of his identical twins were quickly on their way to America. Typically, John Stroud and Tim Bouchard soon acquired the same number of identical twins to study, 16 pairs. Professor Bouchard quickly realized that the coincidences in the lives of the Jim twins were, so to speak, no coincidence. Where twins were concerned, coincidences were the rule rather than the exception. Terry Connolly and Margaret Richardson had married on the same day of the same year within an hour of each other. Both had 4 children, who were conceived and born at roughly the same time. Both had intended to name their first daughters Ruth, but had changed their minds. 2 other twins, Dorothy Lowe and Bridget Hamilton, had kept a diary for 1 year and had filled in exactly the same days. Male twins Oscar Storr and Jack Uffé had been taken off in opposite directions by their parents, and while Jack had been brought up an Orthodox Jew in America, Oscar had gone to Germany and become a member of the Hitler Youth. When they met at the airport in 1979, both were wearing square, wire-rimmed glasses, blue shirts with epaulettes, and identical mustaches. Both flushed the lavatory before and after using it, stored rubber bands on their wrists, and had identical speech rhythms, although one spoke English and the other German. In England, John Stroud brought together Eric Bucock and Tommy Marriott, who were both wearing square, wire-rimmed glasses and goatee beards, and who both worked as charge hands in Yorkshire factories. He also noted that coincidences continued to pursue Barbara Herbert and Daphne Goodship, who, although they were living at opposite ends of the country, often bought the same book at the same time and changed the color of their hair at the same time without consulting one another. In the summer of 1954, a couple who prefer to be known as Mr. and Mrs. Allen set out for a day in the country. Both had been overworking recently, and they badly needed a break. They woke up feeling oddly depressed, although neither mentioned this to the other. They took a bus in Dorking, but went past their stop and alighted at Wotton Hatch, near the village of Walton, birthplace of diarist John Evelyn. Instead of walking back, they decided to go and look at the Evelyn family church. And when they finally came out of the churchyard, they turned right and found themselves facing an overgrown path with high bushes on either side. It led uphill to a clearing with a wooden seat. There they had a view over the valley, and they decided to sit down and eat their sandwiches. They could hear the sound of a dog barking and someone chopping wood, but Mrs. Allen felt oddly uneasy. Suddenly a silence descended and the birdsong ceased. Mrs. Allen was overcome by a sense of foreboding and went icy cold. At that moment she became aware that 3 men had entered the clearing behind her. Although she had had her back to them, she could see them quite clearly somehow. All 3 wore what looked like clerical garb. The man in the middle had a round, friendly face, but the other 2 seemed to radiate hatred and hostility. When Mrs. Allen tried to turn round, she found she was paralyzed and unable to move. Then the experience passed. She asked her husband if it had gone cold, and he touched her arm and said she felt like a corpse. They got up and left hastily. Neither is clear about what happened next, except that at some point they fell asleep on the grass. Then they found themselves in Dorking, both in a state of confusion and unable to remember clearly how they got there. They took the train home for Battersea. 2 years later, Mrs. Allen decided to return. She went into the church without looking around outside. When she emerged, she turned right, expecting to find the path uphill. Then she was surprised to discover that there was no uphill. The countryside was quite flat. She went home and told her husband, who thought she was being silly. The following Sunday, he made the same journey, only to find that his wife had been telling the truth. There was no overgrown path, no clearing, no wooden seat. A local woodman had told him there was no wooden seat on the whole estate. The ruins of ancient cities in South America have been found honeycombed with tiny tunnels, staircases, and passageways, so small that normal men have to traverse them on their hands and knees. Who built these things and why? Even in the United States, in New Salem, New Hampshire, not far from Exeter, site of a UFO flap in 1965, There is an ancient construction of tunnels and tiny chambers built long before the Indians arrived. They say that, quote, little men constructed the place. Another elaborate system of tiny tunnels lies outside of Cusco, Peru, home of many intense saucer flaps. A large number of people reported seeing two luminous dwarfs get out of a disk near Cusco on August 20th, 1965, and the lieutenant governor of Santa Barbara, Peru, solemnly declared that he encountered two tiny humanoids walking in the snows near Lake Coilacocha on September 12, 1965. They disappeared, he said, in the midst of a deafening noise. This unfathomable ability to vanish instantly into thin air is described in many reports. During the August 1965 flap, 6 witnesses in Grand Forks, North Dakota said they saw a blinking, transparent, circular object resting on a golf course, and that it contained, quote, little figures inside, moving like a silhouette. When some of the witnesses ran towards the object, it disappeared with a loud bang. It just blew up, one of them observed. Other transparent objects have been seen many times over the years. On August 28, 1962, 3 people encountered a brightly lit object on the ground 300 yards from National Highway No. 2 near the city of Dolores, Argentina. It was, they said, about 30 feet long and 15 feet high, and there were, quote, human-like figures moving about inside the machine. Sometime after 4 a.m. on the morning of November 17, 1966, in Gaffney, South Carolina, 2 policemen, Charles Hutchins and A.G. Husky, were making a routine patrol along the isolated, unpopulated road through an outlying section of Gaffney known as the West Buford Street Extension when, as they neared a right-angle bend in the road, they suddenly saw a metallic object directly in front of them. This object was descending when they first saw it, Hutchins said, and was about 25 feet above the ground. He described it as being spherical, like a ball, with a wide, flat rim around it. There were no lights or portholes visible on it. It was completely dark, reflecting a dull gold color in the headlights of the police car. Their car did not stall. As the object settled to within a few feet of the ground, both men got out of their car in a state of benumbed amazement. Later, Hutchins estimated that the object must have been about 20 feet in diameter. A small door suddenly opened noiselessly on the underside of the sphere, he said, and a short ladder, 4 to 6 feet long, dropped down. White light poured out of the opening, but neither man could see anything in the interior. A figure appeared in the doorway, descended the ladder, and walked slowly and deliberately toward the 2 police officers. When the figure reached a point about 15 to 20 feet from the 2 men, it stopped. He didn't move stiffly, Officer Hutchins told us. He moved just like anybody else, but kind of slow, like he was taking his time. He wasn't scared of us or anything like that. In appearance, quote, he was about the size of a 12-year-old boy, maybe 4 feet. He wore no helmet or headgear and was dressed in a gold suit with no buttons or zippers. His costume was shiny like metal in the reflection of the headlights. It was not self-luminous. We were both kind of shaky and scared, Hutchins admitted frankly, so he did most of the talking. When we asked questions, he wouldn't answer us, but just went right on talking. Hutchins could not remember seeing the feet of the creature. It was standing in high grass, and the feet must have been hidden. Unfortunately, our interview took place a full year after the incident, and both men had understandably forgotten small details. They cannot even remember the full context of the conversation. He talked real good, like a college graduate, Hutchins claimed. Didn't have any accent or anything. He acted like he knew exactly what he was saying and doing. Didn't make any quick moves or false moves. He just stood there and talked to us. What exactly was said? Officer Hutchins recalls that he stammered out a question like, "What are you doing here?" The creature didn't reply, but asked a question of his own. He wanted to know why we were both dressed alike, Hutchins said, so I guess we told him we were police officers. His speech was very, very precise. He pronounced each word carefully. I can't remember everything he said now, but it wasn't anything very important. I asked him where he was from, but he didn't answer. He just laughed. He had a funny kind of laugh. The confrontation was brief, perhaps only 2 or 3 minutes. Then Hutchinson said the creature announced, quote, "I will return in 2 days." He turned, walked slowly back to the ladder, and climbed into the object. The door closed quietly, and the craft began to whir. Quote, "It wasn't like those whirring sounds in science fiction movies. There was no screeching to it," Hutchins observed. "It was soft, like an engine with a muffler on it." The object rose slowly and vanished into the sky. The 2 policemen said they stood there for a few minutes in stunned silence before they finally pulled themselves together and returned to the police station. They went back to the site the next day with a local councilman named Hill and found several fresh footprints in the exact spot where the little man had stood. They looked like children's footprints, Hutchins said. No casts were made. According to a report in London's Daily Mail for December 27, 1924, based on an earlier account, a local South African newspaper, on the morning of November 1st, 1922, Hugh Ballance looked out to sea while on the beach at Margate, Natal, and spied 2 whales engaged in combat with what seemed to be an immense, pure white polar bear. After several hours of battle, which had attracted a crowd of spectators on the beach, The mystery beast was killed by the whales, and that evening the waves carried its corpse ashore. When curious onlookers drew near, they saw to their great surprise that instead of possessing a distinct head, it bore instead a long trunk-like appendage measuring about 5 feet. At the other end of its body was a 10-foot tail, and the entire carcass measured a colossal 47 feet. Equally striking was its clothing of snow-white fur, about 8 inches long and exactly like the pelage of a genuine polar bear. Now, it is well known that when carcasses of sharks or whales decompose, the layer of fibrous connective tissue beneath these creatures' outer skin begins to dry and assumes the form of stiff, spiky, quote-unquote hair. However, the fur of Margate's trunked mystery beast seemed too long and luxuriant to be explained away as dried-out connective tissue. Anyway, it must be remembered that the creature's pure white fur was clearly observed during its battle with the whales while the animal was still alive. Tragically, unforgivably even, this extraordinary carcass was actually allowed to rot on the beach without any zoologist taking the time or trouble to come along and examine it. After 10 days, the waves that had brought it ashore bore it back into the sea, and it was not seen again. Science had been given a rare chance to witness and document one of the sea's most surprising secrets, but it failed to capitalize on it, and so the mystery of Margate's marine elephant remains unsolved. It did not resemble any animal known to zoology or to paleontology, yet not a single photograph or sample of its perplexing corpse or pelage exists. In November 1936, the carcass of a 24-foot-long elephant-headed sea monster with white fur and a 14-foot tail was found on Alaska's desolate Glacier Island. Yet despite being examined by a team led by W.J. McDonald, supervisor of the Chugach National Forest, its remains were not preserved, and its ultimate fate is unknown. In the Chicago Chronicle of April 13, 1897, appeared the following under the headline, Airship Seen in Iowa. Fontanelle, Iowa, April 12th. The airship was seen here at 8:30 tonight and was viewed by the whole population. It came from the southeast and was not over 200 feet above the treetops and moved very slowly, not to exceed 10 miles an hour. The machine could be plainly seen and is described as being 60 feet in length, and the vibration of the wings could be plainly seen. It carried the usual colored lights, and the working of the machinery could be heard, as also could the strains of music, as from an orchestra. It was hailed but passed on to the north, seeming to increase its speed and disappeared. There is no doubt in Fontanelle that it was the real thing, and is testified to by the most prominent citizens. According to an Irish story from 1211 A.D., there happened in the borough of Cloera on one Sunday, while the people were at Mass, a marvel. In this town is a church dedicated to St. Kinnerus. It befell that an anchor was dropped from the sky with a rope attached to it, and one of the flukes caught in the arch above the church door. The people rushed out of the church and saw in the sky a ship with men on board floating before the anchor cable, and they saw a man leap overboard and jump down to the anchor as if to release it. He looked as if he were swimming in water. The folk rushed up and tried to seize him, but the bishop forbade the people to hold the man, for it might kill him, he said. The man was freed and hurried up to the ship, where the crew cut the rope and the ship sailed out of sight, but the anchor is in the church and has been there ever since as a testimony. At a hospital in Nuoro, Sardinia, Italy, in 1972, water was flowing through the floor of every ward to which 9-year-old Eugenio Rossi was moved. Plumbers could find no explanation. Water appeared on the floors, on a piano, even in closed drawers, at a house in Ayersville, Ohio, USA, during 5th to 10th July 1975. But the ceilings and walls were never wet. A plumber searched for a day for a leak, but found none. He was mystified. Quote, I'd open a wooden kitchen cabinet drawer and there'd be half a gallon of water in it. I picked up a rug with an 18-inch wet spot, but the floor underneath was dry. It was really eerie. Another expert who examined the house said, right before my eyes, little puddles formed all over the bathroom floor. It's a mystery to me. A similar case was reported from Windsor, Vermont, USA in September 1955, when the Waterman family found beads of moisture on their furniture, which returned however frequently it was removed. A shallow dish being carried from one room to another, filled with water on the way. In the Martins' case, their watery affliction followed them from one home to another. When they lived in Methuen, Massachusetts, USA, water spurted from various places as well as seeping from walls and ceiling, and when in 1963 they moved, the same thing happened at their new home. In the case of a house in Oboro, a district of Abidjan, Ivory Coast, blood spurted out of the walls on 12 March 1985. Police and reporters saw bloody clothing, kitchen utensils, a shower, and some doors. It was also reported that the blood followed the occupants around. Each footstep left a trace of blood. The blood smelled bad, but none of the occupants was wounded. Not many months later, a couple living in Saint Quentin, France, found tiny red droplets all over the living room walls and carpet. This was in January 1986. In February, they reappeared, and the same night the sound of smashing crockery was heard downstairs, but nothing was damaged. The following day, the couple awoke to find their pillows and the kitchen table covered with tiny red stains. The next night, the stains reappeared on the bedclothes and also on their pajamas. The couple moved out of the house for several weeks. The stains, when analyzed, were found to be dried blood, but we have no information as to whether it was human or animal blood. In the case of the mysterious blood flows at an Atlanta, Georgia, USA home in September 1987, tests showed the blood was human and was type O. No source could be discovered for the blood, which was found splattered on the walls and floors in several rooms of an elderly couple's home. William Winston, blood type A, said, quote, "I'm not bleeding, my wife's not bleeding, nobody else was here." His wife told how she had stepped out of the bath and found the floor covered with blood. In Tires, Valencia, Spain, on July 25, 1979, at 11:30 a.m., Federico Ibanez, a 54-year-old farmer, was visiting some vineyards, which he owned, when he noticed something white and shining ahead. He thought it must be a neighbor's car. When he rounded the bend, the motor car was blocking the dirt road and Ibanez pulled up behind it. But as he stopped, Ibanez realized that the white object was not a car at all. It had no wheels and stood on two legs. The object resembled half an egg standing on its flat end. It was nearly 9 feet high and almost 3 feet wide. Suddenly the witness noticed two beings running toward the object. They stood about 3 feet tall and wore white, shining outfits that reached down to their knees and covered their heads. At its widest, each outfit was about 16 inches. The beings had little black legs that ended in little feet that looked like quote-unquote boxing gloves. Their faces were blank except for what appeared to be black protruding spectacles of some kind. Within seconds, the beings entered the object, which took off immediately, throwing up a cloud of dust. Ibanez got back in his car, drove off to inspect his vines, and then returned to the site of his encounter. A subsequent investigation found 4 circular marks on the road, forming a precise rectangle. The farmer, who knew nothing of UFOs, was held in high regard by the locals. Science Gossip, 1886-238. That small snails of a land species had fallen near Redruth, Cornwall, July 8, 1886, during a heavy thunderstorm. Roads and fields strewn with them, so that they were gathered up by the hatful, none seen to fall by the writer of this account, snails said to be quite different to any previously known in the district. In the Philosophical Magazine, 58-310, there is an account of snails said to have fallen at Bristol in a field of 3 acres, in such quantities that they were shoveled up. It is said that the snails may be considered as a local species. Nature 47-278, that according to Das Wetter, December 1892, upon August 9, 1892, a yellow cloud appeared over Paderborn, Germany. From this cloud fell a torrential rain in which were hundreds of mussels. Lizards said to have fallen on the sidewalks of Montreal, Canada, December 28, 1857, from Notes and Queries 8-6-104. The London Times, April 27, 1872, says that from 4 o'clock Thursday afternoon until half past 11 Thursday night, the houses 56 and 58 Reverdy Road, Bermondsey, were assailed with stones and other missiles coming from an unseen quarter. 2 children were injured, every window broken, and several articles of furniture were destroyed. Although there was a strong body of policemen scattered in the neighborhood, they could not trace the direction whence the stones were thrown. London Times, September 16, 1841. That in the home of Mrs. Charton at Sutton Courthouse, Sutton Lane, Chiswick, windows had been broken by an unseen agent. Every attempt to detect the perpetrator failed. The mansion was detached and surrounded by high walls. No other building was near it. Now some strange events from Brazil. At Araguari River, Amapá, many people saw UFO rise from river, hover, then fly out to sea, November 1980. Barra da Tijuca, press photographer Ed Keffel took 5 pictures of UFO, 7th of May 1952. Bauru, survey worker saw a 150-foot disc-shaped UFO standing on 3 legs. 3 7-foot entities tried to get him inside. He hid and watched as they tossed huge stones and leapt about. 23rd July 1947. Brasilia, poltergeist outbreak, 18 to 19 September 1960. Carapicuaba, stones, bricks, and concrete falling on 6 slum houses, September 1974. Near Cocpava, meat and blood fell from the sky for 5 or so minutes, 27th August 1968. In Cordillera dos Pereces, explorer Colonel Fawcett and companions saw naked hairy savages who threatened them with bones and arrows, called locally Maracoxes, and possibly primitive men, 1914. Near Curitiba, strange objects seen on sea, which sank, then rose, then sank again, 10th January 1958. In Fernando de Noronha, sea monster seen off this island. Its head was as big as a cow's, and witness also saw 1 coil of its body, 30 feet away from head, 1905. Near Francisco de Sales, Minas Gerais, 23-year-old farmer Antonio Villas-Boas was taken from his tractor into a UFO by several entities forcibly undressed, and blood was taken by cupping. A naked female entity later entered and made advances to which Villas-Boas responded, and they had intercourse. Before leaving the craft, he attempted to take an object as proof of his experience, but the entity stopped him. 14th October 1957. Iparanga, São Paulo, poltergeist outbreak with a wide range of phenomena, including stool passing through closed door and sliding downstairs, rapping noises, outbreaks of fire, including inside a plastic bag of clothes, clothing and a floor being soaked with water and equally mysteriously drying out, objects moving about and disappearing. The poltergeist followed the family through 4 homes and stopped when the daughter got married, 1968 to 73. At Itapeva, rocks mysteriously flying at houses. One fell through cathedral roof, May 1987. At Habutakebal, poltergeist outbreak centered on a young girl named Maria, involving stones and eggs flying indoors, materialization of objects, crockery thrown and broken, Maria being slapped and having furniture thrown at her, and being suffocated at night and having needles stuck in her heel and her clothing burned. Began December 1965 and continued for at least a year. At Oahu, Pessoa, beans fell from the sky, June 1971. In Lynn Sanatorium, woman on night duty gave water to female UFO entity, August 1968. At Manaus, Amazon River, traveler saw 5 quote-unquote birds with leathery bodies and wings, February 1947. At Mato Grosso, reports of humanoid creature known as Mapinguari, which killed cattle and pulled out their tongues. Near Minduri, 2 giants, about 18 feet tall, clothed in red, seen from behind as they walked up the side of a hill, August 1958. Rio Negro, explorer Major Percy Fawcett killed 62-foot anaconda. Normally these snakes are at most 25 to 30 feet long. 1907. In the late 1940s, 2 photographs were taken of the Sucurihu Gigante, a 60 to 150-foot monster snake with glowing green eyes said to live on the Rio Araguaia. Pilotas near Rio Grande do Sul, couple saw birdmen, early 1950s. Pernambuco, Recife, 40 sea miles offshore, officer and merchant vessel saw sea monster about 100 feet long, overtaking ship with the speed of an arrow off a bow. It had large dorsal fins, 1906. Paropava River near Iguape. Disc-shaped UFO plunged into river, 31st October 1963. Piata Beach, motorcyclist saw UFO over the sea and took 4 photographs showing markings on underside. He then entered a trance state and wrote a message, as if from the UFO, calling for an end to atomic tests. 24th April 1959. Near Pontal, fishermen saw UFO land and 3 small entities come out and collect leaves, grass, and water in a tube. 4th November 1954. Ponta Poró, poltergeist outbreak, 1969 to 73. Porto das Caixas, in church, 300-year-old life-size painted wooden statue of Christ on the cross dripped human blood. Miracle cures followed, beginning January 1968 and for at least 10 years. Rio de Janeiro, 100 miles north of, fishermen reported 2 sightings of sea monster with long neck and dark green scales, 100 feet long, August 1982. Off Santa Marta Grande, unidentified submarine object seen by crew of cargo ship, 30th July 1967. Sao Paulo, poltergeist outbreak, July 1972, paranormal movement of rocks and other objects, spring 1987. Sao Paulo, São José dos Campos, Rio de Janeiro, multicolored UFOs, likened to ping-pong balls, seen in the skies and on radar, and fighter jets were sent up to chase them. One was surrounded by 13 colored lights, 19th May 1986. Sorocaba, poltergeist outbreak, several weeks from mid-July 1972. Suzano, poltergeist outbreak with several incidents of spontaneous combustion, 1970. Trinidad Island, marine photographer took 4 pictures of UFOs seen from Brazilian Navy ship, 16th January 1958. Ubatuba, UFO exploded over sea and some debris was retrieved for analysis. It was very pure magnesium, 10th September 1957. Uruburu River, watershed area, expedition member saw and shot at thick-set black figure standing upright. He thought it was a Mapinguari, 1930. Now, one story from Bulgaria, in Sofia, bright spherical UFO flew slowly at a great height over the city, 1908. Conical UFO seen, 9th April 1967. Bluish neon UFO of trapezoidal shape, seen moving against the wind, 21st November 1967. Now I got 3 from Burma. In Komiya, thousands of small fish fell in heavy storm, World War II. In Mandalay, rice fell from the sky, January 1952. Mekong River, tall, dark, hairy monkey men, seen near Burma, Thailand, Laos border, July 1969. In Cameroon, Asumbo Mountains, geologists saw a giant bat or pterodactyl, 1932. Lake Berombi, Mumbo Kumba, children saw two monsters in lake with necks 12 to 15 feet above water, 1948 or 1949. September 1943, 0400 hours. On Cativo, Argentina, Navarro Ocampo, driving between Rosario and Cordoba, saw a large saucer-shaped object on the ground 500 meters to the left of the road. It glowed with a bluish-green light, made a whistling sound, rose to 100 meters altitude, then left at fantastic speed. A strange metal block is said to have been found at the spot. In the end of August 1944, in Mattoon, Illinois, a mysterious man appeared at windows as if in search of someone. He stunned witnesses by pointing at them a device that made consciousness dissolve and left a strange glowing smell behind. 1945, Habibisheim, Germany. An American soldier saw a disc-shaped object come down rapidly, oscillate, and land. The site could not be found in the dark. The event took place 35 kilometers northwest of the town. March 1945, Belfast, Maine. A man hunting observed an elongated object flying very slowly, tilted toward the earth. It crashed into some trees at the end of a clearing. The enormous craft seemed undamaged as it rested briefly on the ground, then lifted up again with a humming sound, started to spin, released a shower of fine silvery threads, and rose straight up, disappearing in seconds. March 1945, Aleutian Islands. Aboard the U.S. attack transport Delaroff, 14 sailors saw a dark sphere rise out of the ocean, follow a curved trajectory, and fly away after circling their ship. June 10, 1947, 2300 hours, Douglas, Arizona. Coral Lorenzen saw a light rise from the ground in Mexican territory. It took a definite spherical shape and vanished in less than 10 seconds among the stars. June 21, 1947, Maury Island, near Tacoma, Washington. Harold A. Dahl and others allegedly saw 6 tire-shaped objects 30 meters in diameter, metallic with dark openings over Puget Sound. One of the objects exploded, showering the witnesses with metal, officially regarded as hoax. Yeah, I think I have heard of that one being dismissed. June 21st, 1947, 11:50 hours. Spokane, Washington. 8 disc-shaped objects, the size of a house, were seen flying at 1,000 kilometers an hour. A civilian woman stated that the objects fell with a dead leaf motion and landed before 10 witnesses on the shore of the St. Joe River in Idaho. June 27th, 1947, 10:30 hours. Bisbee, Arizona. John A. Pesci, electrical worker, and another witness independently saw a disc-shaped object which seemed to land near Tin Town. June 30th, 1947, 09:10 hours. Grand Canyon near Williams Field, Arizona. A Navy lieutenant was flying at 9,000 meters toward the south when he saw 2 circular objects diving at unconceivable speed. They were gray, about 3 meters in diameter, and appeared to land 40 kilometers south of the Grand Canyon. July 8th, 1947, 1200 hours. Muroc Airfield, California. An Air Force major observed a metallic object reflecting sunlight, oscillate, go down to ground level, and rise up again. Simultaneously, it was observed by a captain in Rogers Dry Lake. July 23, 1947, Bauru, near Pitanga, Brazil, a group of survey workers ran away as they heard a hissing noise and saw a disc land 50 meters away. Jose C. Higgins saw 2 figures through a window. Later, 3 beings in shiny clothes and translucent suits with oversized bald heads, huge round eyes, no eyelashes or eyebrows, and a metal box on their back emerged from the craft. They were over 2 meters tall. They drew the solar system and pointed to Uranus as if to suggest that this was their point of origin.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
That was a public service announcement designed to scare the shit out of you.
When I was a teenager, my grandfather died in the guest room of my family's house under the care of hospice. A couple of days after he passed away, a friend and I were in the same guest room. We were sitting on the same sofa bed which my grandfather died on when it had been folded out as a bed. My friend's eyes widened in fearful realization, and he said, "Oh my God, we're sitting right where your grandfather died." Immediately after he said that, the television in the room came on by itself. We bolted out of the room and got my mom, who came back to the room with us to check it out. The TV was still on, but we were unable to turn it off with a remote or from the set. My mom was about to unplug the TV, but my terrified friend stopped her, saying that if the TV was still on while unplugged, he would never be able to sleep again. We let it be, and it eventually just turned itself off. An interesting point is that my grandfather watched that TV a lot during his last days. Something else strange happened around that time. I remember it as occurring right before my grandfather died, but my mom remembers it as happening after he died. Either way, paranormal events tend to occur not just after someone dies, but also while they are dying. Also, science has shown that a death of natural causes is a gradual process rather than an immediate event. Anyways, my mother, grandmother, and I were in the kitchen, and the grandfather clock at the end of the room started going bananas. Both the minute hand and the hour hand were spinning round and round very quickly, and the chimes were all going off. The three of us found ourselves standing there, just staring in awe at this thing going crazy. My grandmother even tried to make it stop, but she couldn't. Eventually it just stopped on its own. I should note that this is a clock which runs on potential and kinetic energy. It wasn't plugged into a wall socket and certainly wasn't computerized in any way. The only way for the clock to behave like it would be if someone were manipulating its inner works directly with their hands, but of course there was no one there. I should also note that the grandfather clock had been built by my grandfather, the one who was dying or had just died. He was a very accomplished hobbyist carpenter and had built the clock as a gift for my father, who collected clocks when my parents got married. Another story I remember is when I was a bit older. I was waking up from a nap one afternoon, and I saw a man floating in the air over me. I remember that he looked like a normal man other than the fact that he had a very malicious and frightening face with glowing red eyes and a very wide grinning mouth filled with sharp monstrous teeth. He just floated there for a bit, sneering at me, before he started to float backwards and into the wall, which he eventually melted into. I know there's a good possibility that this was really just what's known as a hypnagogic hallucination, but it also may have been some sort of nasty spiritual attack also. Some strange things also happened to my brother, but they all occurred when he was attending West Point Military Academy. One afternoon, while lying down in bed to take a nap before his next class, he heard someone come into the room and sit down at his desk and start typing on the computer's keyboard. He assumed it was a certain fellow student who was in the habit of using their computer from time to time. He felt annoyed because it was keeping him awake and turned over in bed to say something, but there was no one else in the room. He assumed that they must have sneaked out and carefully closed the door, so he turned back around to rest. Before long he felt someone nudge his shoulder, so he asked annoyed, "What?" There was no response, but he felt a harder nudge on his shoulder again, so he exclaimed, "What? What do you want? I'm trying to take a nap." Then his shoulder was almost violently shoved, and he spun around immediately to see no one there. A bit shaken, he gave up on getting a nap and later went to class. When he got back, he told his roommate what had happened to him, and his roommate just stared at him with wide eyes. My brother asked him what was wrong, and his roommate said that when my brother was in class, he had been in the room and tried to take a nap, and the exact same thing had happened to him as well. He was repeatedly nudged, each subsequent nudge more forceful than the last, until he sat up in frustration and saw nobody to blame for the nuisance. A friend of my brother's, who lived on the same floor of the same building, claimed that he saw his roommate, who was trying to sleep at the time, being nudged by a person who was suddenly in the room. He couldn't make out the person's features because his desk lamp was the only light on in the room. When the sleeping roommate woke up, the mystery man was suddenly gone. They ran out into the hall, but there was no one in sight. Another friend of my brother's at West Point Military Academy said that he woke up one night to see his roommate being pushed down into his own bed, and he even saw a depression on his chest. There were stories of other paranormal events floating around West Point Military Academy, and even though secondhand stories are never as compelling or convincing as first-hand accounts, I'll share two of them since they both have rather remarkable aspects. The first one involves a room in one of the dormitories which was apparently so fraught with abnormal and frightening occurrences that investigators of some kind were brought in. They had a student sleep in the room while hooked up to devices that monitored his health and vital signs. They eventually had to pull him out of the room because his vital signs were dropping. Apparently, the student almost went into a coma. The other story involves a house on the campus. For those who don't know, there are quite a few houses on a large campus for officers and their families. People in one of the houses would consistently report seeing a woman holding a baby running down a specific hallway. The interesting thing about the apparition was that she was knee-deep in the floor, running through it like a badly positioned hologram. It turns out that the house had burned down at one point in its history, and that when they rebuilt the house, the new floor was a bit higher up than the old one. So that certainly sounds like a replay apparition, whereas my brother's story involves something with intelligence, obviously. I've also heard haunting stories where the apparition is floating in the air where there used to be a floor in the building.
He was abducted by aliens earlier this afternoon. That little girl got lost under the bed and she went into an alternate dimension.
This article is called Google's Artificial Intelligence Bot Says the Purpose of Living is to Live Forever. It was posted to businessinsider.com on June 27th, 2015 by Nathan MacAlone or MacAlone. This week, Google released a research paper chronicling one of its latest forays into artificial intelligence. Researchers at the company programmed an advanced type of chatbot that learns how to respond in conversations based on examples from a training set of dialogue. And the bot doesn't just answer by spitting out canned answers in response to certain questions, it can form new answers from new questions. This means Google's researchers could get a little creative with it, and they certainly did. They asked the bot everything from boring IT questions to inquiries about the meaning of life. The responses were alternatively impressive, amusing, and unnerving. Here are some of the most poetic interactions from the paper. Human, what is the purpose of life? Machine, to serve the greater good. Human, what is the purpose of living? Machine, to live forever. I'm going to leave out the human machine thing from this point on. Where are you now? I'm in the middle of nowhere. What is the purpose of dying? To have a life. What is the purpose of emotions? I don't know. What is moral? What empowered humanity, what intellectual the essence is. All right. What is immoral? The fact that you have a child. What is morality? The answer, what is altruism? Question, what is the definition of altruism? Answer, if you don't believe in God, then you don't know. Human, okay, so what is the definition of morality? Machine, well, the truth is you're not a believer in God Almighty. Human, tell me the definition of morality. I am quite upset now. Machine, I'm not ashamed of being a philosopher. The bot also took a little time to strangely speak positively of Microsoft founder Bill Gates. Human, what do you think of Bill Gates? Machine, he's a good man. Researchers found it encouraging that the model can remember facts, understand context, perform common sense reasoning without the complexity in traditional pipelines, and that it could generalize to new questions. What they weren't as happy about was that the model only gives simple, short, sometimes unsatisfying answers to our questions, as can be seen above.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
This article is called No One Knows If This Religious Leader is Dead or Meditating. It was posted to PRI.org on May 29, 2014, and was written by Timothy McGrath. His Holiness Sri Ashutosh Maharaj, a wealthy leader in the Punjab city of Jalandhar, is either dead or meditating. A court may decide which, and the Maharaj's $170 million estate is at stake. According to his family, he died from a heart attack on January 29, 2014. According to members of Divya Jyoti Jagrati Sansthan, which was founded in 1983 and which describes itself as a, quote, socio-spiritual, cultural, not-for-profit organization, end quote, he's in a deep state of meditation known as samadhi. Quote, Maharaj has been in deep meditation, end quote, one of his followers said. He has spent many years meditating in sub-zero temperatures in the Himalayas. There is nothing unusual in it. He will return to life as soon as he feels, and we will ensure his body is preserved until then. Punjab police initially confirmed that the Maharaj was deceased, but the Punjab High Court ruled that his condition was a spiritual matter. Now, the Maharaj's wife and son are filing a court application seeking to have his death confirmed, claiming that his followers just want control of his money. While all this gets decided, His Holiness Sri Ashutosh Maharaj will remain right where he is, in a commercial freezer.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
All right, this article is from bbc.co.uk from the Newsbeat section. The title of the article is Police Captain Confirms Children Possessed by Demons by Amelia Butterfly, Newsbeat reporter. January 29th, 2014. A U.S. police captain says he believed a story about a woman who claimed her children were possessed by demons. Latoya Amons from Indiana said her 3 children walked up walls, levitated, and spoke in voices. Official reports filed in 2012 backed up her claims, with psychologists stating that they saw the 9-year-old child speak in different deep voices and walk up the wall backwards. He flipped over and landed on his feet, they added. Gary Police Captain Charles Austin, who has more than 35 years of experience, said he had been convinced by the story. According to a local newspaper, the Indianapolis Star, he described himself as a believer after visiting the house and interviewing Miss Amons and her family. Official Indiana state documents detail more events apparently witnessed by medical experts and those who outside the family. The children's names were removed from the papers to protect their identities. Medical staff reported they observed the children and heard the 7-year-old making growling noises and his eyes rolled into the back of his head. They observed, named blank, lifted and thrown into the wall with nobody touching him. The report also detailed the time when the 7-year-old walked up the wall in front of a number of medical professionals. Named Blank began to have a weird smile on his face, and he charged at the grandmother's stomach and headbutted her several times until she grabbed his hands and started praying. He was speaking in a different, deep voice, saying, "It's time to die. I will kill you," and stirring around the room. He had the weird grin on his face and began to walk backwards while the grandmother was holding his hand, and he walked up the wall backwards while holding the grandmother's hand, and he never let go. He flipped over and landed on his feet in front of the grandmother and sat down in the chair. At other times, Mrs. Amon said she saw her daughter levitate out of her bed, while the 12-year-old also reported being thrown across the room and grabbed by dark shadows. Elsewhere in the report, it shows that an unnamed witness had suggested the mother may have mental health concerns. They also said it may be that the children are performing for the mother and she's encouraging the behavior. The 3 children were removed from the family home by authorities after the reports were filed. According to the Indianapolis Star, the day after the children were taken from Ammons, the hospital chaplain called on Reverend Mike Maginot to carry out an exorcism on the children and their mother. Whenever you would praise God in Latin, no reaction, he said. But you start condemning the demon, condemning the evil spirit, all of a sudden the child is reacting to that. The children were returned 6 months later when the problem subsided. There are now tenants in the property and the landlord has not received any further reports of demonic possession.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
This article is called Remembering the Day UFOs Arrived at Italy's Fiorentina Stadium. It was posted to disinfo.com on January 8, 2013 by Jacob Sloan. No one has ever come up with a satisfactory explanation for the day on which an awe-inspiring fleet of UFOs brought a massive Italian soccer match to a halt in 1954. Via the BBC, witnesses describe it as transcendent. Quote, "It's October 1954. A game between Fiorentina and nearby rivals Pistoiese is underway at the Stadio Artemio Franchi. A crowd of around 10,000 has gathered to watch. Among them is Fiorentina fan Gigi Boni. Now in his 80s, Boni still has vivid memories of watching in disbelief as UFOs hovered above the stadium. Quote, I remember clearly seeing this incredible sight. They were moving very fast and then they just stopped. It all lasted a couple of minutes. I would like to describe them as being like Cuban cigars in the way they looked. The stadium fell silent as the players and fans stood transfixed, staring at these strange objects in the crisp blue autumn sky. So, was it aliens? Pistoiese players Romolo Tucci and Ronaldo Lomi have no doubt that it was. Tucci, still sprightly in his 70s, feels blessed to have witnessed such a strange event. Quote, I was so curious, and I was also so happy because in those years, everybody was talking about aliens. Everybody was talking about UFOs, and we had the experience. We saw them directly for real.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
Disinfo.com. Former World Bank Senior Counsel Karen Hoods says second species controls human civilization. Posted by Jacob Sloan, April 2nd, 2014. Are elongated skulled non-human creatures hiding amongst us? Via collective evolution, about 21 minutes into an eyebrow-raising interview with Red Ice Radio, former senior World Bank lawyer Karen Hughes claims so. Quotes, these countries are not monolithic. There are forces fighting the corruption, and there are forces that have totally been co-opted. The group that's behind the network of control are the Jesuits, and there are also some groups behind them. One of these groups are hominids. They're not human beings. They are very smart. They are not creative. They are mathematical. They have elongated skulls. They may produce offspring and mating with female humans, but that offspring is not fertile. We live in a world of secret societies and secrets, and the information that ought to be public is not public.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
This article is called UFO Flying Over Iran, filmed by commercial airline passenger. It's posted to collectiveevolution.com on November 13th, 2014 by Arjun Walia. A passenger on a commercial airliner flight over Iranian airspace managed to capture some fascinating footage of an unidentified flying object. It seems to be quite small, bright white, and shaped like a disc. UFO sightings are becoming very common, and reports of sighting continue to increase every year. This is one of the most recent reports coming from a commercial airline. Earlier this year, the captain of an A320 Airbus recorded an intense encounter with what, according to the pilot, looks like a metallic UFO. The pilot reported the object as a cigar-shaped / ball-like metallic object that passed within a few feet of the passenger jet while flying near Heathrow Airport in London, England in the summer of 2013.
Science can explain everything if we look hard enough.
Shut up, science bitch.
Nothing is true. Everything is real. Not only is he like ruining my life, but with all this God shit that he's into, he could be ruining my afterlife.
It's a sort of interdimensional vagina that somehow appears. I can interact with it.
The fabric of the entire universe could be torn apart.
I know my mind is changing. I'm already too far gone to know what to do.